You're listening to GenreTainment. And here are your hosts, Marx and Julie.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to GenreTainment. This is your co-host, Marx, joined as always with
co-host Julie. GenreTainment is where we talk about what's happening in the world of books, film, TV, and tabletop role-playing games. We give you interviews with writers, game designers, directors, producers, and actors in both independent and not-so-independent creations.
And on this episode, we have Dr. Emily Zarka, also known as Dr. Z. She has a doctorate in literature from Arizona State University. Her expertise lies in monsters, the gothic and horror in literature, film, and folklore. So she's a monster expert that got on her radar because of her awesome show, Monstrum.
Zarka is the creator, writer, and host of the popular YouTube series Monstrum, the flagship show on PBS's storied humanities channel. To quote her, "I want to show learners across the globe how something as wild as monsters can really teach us about ourselves, our history, and our future as humans."
Now, we recorded this episode a while back, and it took some time for us to kind of get it in shape because Dr. Z had some connection issues. Plus, as you might be able to tell, depending on the platform you're experiencing this episode, we're doing a video episode. It's our first ever. Woo! You can see us do this. We're sticking with audio for genre talk, but we suspect some of you, especially on our Cabot Crossing YouTube channel, would like to see videos with our guests. And we hope you enjoy it, and we'll try to smooth out the format over time and try to improve that transition a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we start the interview, we wanted to update everyone on the Cabot Crossing Publishing Kickstarter, Fairy Tales, Folklores, and Fables Reimagined. We have been busy mailing out bookmarks, and all of the physical books are either in the hands of backers or in the mail on the way. By the way, Dr. Zarka wrote the foreword to Volume 1, Enchanted Tales and Twisted Lore, so keep an eye out on our website for information on the wide release.
And we were thrilled that she agreed to write the foreword, and I think it adds an extra special touch to the anthology. And don't forget, you can not only listen to our episodes on Spotify and the usual podcast feeds, but now also on our Cabot Crossing YouTube channel. We also have other fun stuff over there, like genre play and all sorts of stuff behind the dice or the game, all sorts of stuff. So check it out. Be sure to subscribe if you would like to be notified of new videos. And we have a Patreon if you want to be a super fan and get bonus content. So Patreon is an excellent way to support our work and get bonus content for this show and our others. So a link to that is in the show description.
Now let's get to our interview with professor and monster expert, Dr. Emily Zarka. Hi, Dr. Z. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Now, what started your interest in monsters?
Being a spooky little kid, to be quite frank.
You were Wednesday?
Yeah, I was like a blonde, very pastel wearing Wednesday, yes. No, I was very fortunate to have a mom who was a big fan of sci-fi and horror, and I just grew up with, those movies kind of on in the background and being introduced to like scary stories to tell in the dark at a pretty young age. And I was instantly attracted to the genre, but a lot of my friends weren't super into it. So it was kind of like this weird hidden thing for me until probably I was in my teens. And then I was very lucky to have some wonderful professors at the University of Colorado Boulder who showed me that like Gothic literature and horror is actually a field of study that you can get into. And that sort of clicked for me with the undead. And I've been riding the wave ever since.
That's nice. Great.
Well, so you're probably best known for your show, Monstrum. So how did you go from that to Monstrum?
So I started my dissertation on the undead, specifically looking at female writers and undead bodies in the Romantic period. And in doing that, I'd find myself doing these completely unnecessary like research pitfall holes of just looking into other kinds of monsters and folklore, and really started to see this thread throughout humanity that we've always been storytelling and we've always had monsters. And I wanted to expand my research outside of this one historical time period. So while that was going on, I also came to the realization that tenure track jobs in my field as a humanities scholar, and specifically as a literature scholar, were very few and far between. And I
Yes.
said, yeah. And so I decided to pivot and dedicate to what I'm passionate about, which is public scholarship. So I do teach at a university, but I really think it's important to take knowledge and learning outside of the constraints of the ivory tower of universities. So I had this idea, and like one of my life dreams was to be, Dr. Emily Zarka, monster expert on the History Channel or one of those platforms. And when I was training at ASU to give this like TED style talk about my research, someone asked, why be the expert when you can be the show? And I had never allowed myself to think that big, because I think a lot of the time, at least in more traditional academic graduate training, it's very much like the straight route, right? It's like you write your book, you do the tenure track, you do the peer reviewed articles. So I came up with a slogan that I wanted to do for Monsters what Anthony Bourdain did for food, and just show that we can really get into difficult conversations and show commonalities across humanity through monsters as like a more safe entry point. And luckily, PBS was willing to give me 15 minutes to essentially cold pitch them. I had zero idea what I was doing. I didn't have like a pitch deck. I didn't even have anything. I just had like passion and a dream, and they were looking for more humanities content. And since then, I've been fortunate enough to still be working with them. We share a lot of the same values about, public education and academic driven research. And they paired me up with my production team, Spotson, and we've been on this absolutely crazy, wonderful ride since.
Awesome.
That's wonderful. Now, your show does a great job of representing monsters from a variety of cultures. How do you decide which monsters to feature? And are there any cultures or mythologies that you feel are underrepresented in monster studies?
I think that at least publicly, so first I'll answer the question how we decide which monsters. Me and my weirdness, to be quite frank. I'll sort of get like, an earwig, like, oh, I'll read about this one thing that's maybe on like a Reddit thread, or I'll come across like a footnote in my research for another type of monster. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And then I'll talk to my team about it and they'll throw out ideas as well. But I famously, or I should say infamously, read every single comment on every single video that's posted on the Storied channel.
Oh my.
And yes, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's part of what my practice with YouTube. And I'm lucky enough to have some amazing Monstrum fans and viewers who are constantly suggesting new and cool things that I haven't even heard of. So I keep a running document of all those suggestions. And then if some more than one person wants to see that thing, I'll like make a note of that. And so we use that list. But every season of Monstrum, we try to balance those more traditionally known monsters, which I would say are largely either Western based monsters or monsters that are more frequently seen in like tabletop or video games. And with more sort of obscure, localized folklore type monsters. Because that was something that was important for me from the very beginning of Monstrum. I didn't want it just to be, European based Western monsters. That wasn't as exciting for me. And frankly, there's a lot of that out there, and we've done some of it. And I think we've done some of it well, but I also think that one of my aims of having this bizarre platform is to allow more voices into the conversation. And if part of that is just introducing people to a new monster and letting them talk about it in the comments, and like that works for me. So I would say underrepresented would be probably anything outside of like Europe and like Japan tradition. I know that like yokai are pretty popular. They've been in a lot of video games. So I think that more localized stuff is lesser known, but can be super cool. And I think, again, non-English speaking countries have a lot of monsters that at least English speaking countries are not aware of. So I'm constantly digging for those.
Awesome. Well, along that line, what's one of the most bizarre monsters you've heard of?
One of the most bizarre and near and dear to my heart, and I'll tell you why, is the Mapinguari. So the Mapinguari is from primarily the tradition of indigenous Brazilian peoples in the Amazon. And it's a very large, hairy, incredibly foul-smelling animal type monster with backwards facing feet with long claws. It has long fangs. Yeah, and it either has two eyes or one eye in the center of its forehead and a giant gaping fanged mouth in the center of its stomach. Which is so bizarre and unusual and terrifying. And like the smell aspect is really fascinating to me. But I think also what I like about that monster is it usually just eats livestock. unless you trespass on its territory, because it's kind of the protector of the Amazon. And then if essentially you're a human and you do the Amazon wrong, you do disrespect nature, it will like rip you limb from limb and eat you. So it kind of like toes the line between, like demigod or deity and monster. And I think that's really cool. And it's one of my favorites because there's some scholars who believe that it's based on old knowledge of like real life prehistoric ground sloths. And I'm a huge sloth lover. So that seems
Yeah.
both terrifying and also amazing. But I think it's important. And I've said this before in interviews that I think that there's like a grain of truth to every monster that's inspired by something in the real world. But I also think it's important to point out that like those scientific explanations or thinking of like fossils and that kind of stuff is a facet, but I don't want to diminish the like thousands of years of human creativity, right, that have come up with these absolutely incredible beings and inspiration. So I think that's what research looks like, is why this monster, why at this point in history, and why do we keep telling these stories?
Awesome.
Now, what's one of the scariest monsters that you've come across?
Yeah. Any kind of like ghostly malevolent entity that can throw its voice or mimic your voice. And there's quite a few of them. I think those are really scary. Because they're like thinking like particularly like the Nishi duck. There's something that about wanting to communicate with maybe a lost loved one and you think you are, but it's actually not that person, is really scary. In terms of the most like grotesque one I can think of, it would probably have to be the Nuka-Levi, which is from Orkney Island tradition. And it's a completely skinless, like all its body's just like muscle and sinew and like black blood horse with one eye. And then attached to its back is the skinless upper torso of like a human with like really long arms. And it's pretty much toxic to everything that like smells its breath, but it's frankly just like really disgusting. And I think that's just really creative and cool.
Yeah, and it stinks too. There's a trend.
Yeah.
Trend. Yeah, people don't like stinky stuff. Although I'm researching a new monster now that I won't give away yet for this season that actually is repelled by some stinky things. So,
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so we did most bizarre, we did most scariest. What about not all monsters are from ancient folklore? Some of them are very recent. So what's one of the more recent monsters you've had a story on?
I think digital folklore is a space that's absolutely booming. And as someone who, spends countless hours and weeks of research trying to trace to the origin point of some of these older monsters, knowing that I'm never going to be able to, just trying to get as close as possible, having a timestamp for something, right? Like for a YouTube video or a TikTok video or a Reddit, channel of when something is created, when that story is first told, is incredible to me. So one example of that I can think of would be Siren Head. So Siren Head is a newer monster that came onto the scene in 2018. And I've actually had the pleasure of doing an episode about that and talking to its original creator, Trevor Henderson, who explained kind of what inspired him. But it's a monster that is distinguished by its two sort of retro emergency announcement type speakers that make up its head. It has no eyes. It's extremely thin and looks humanoid, but is not actually made of any human materials. So it's in this weird eldritch being between, and it can like disguise itself as like a telephone pole or some like parts of technology that we're familiar with. And I think that's really fascinating. And I know Trevor said that he was in part inspired by these radio stations that play just like random sequences of numbers, like number stations.
Yes.
Yeah. And that he just became fascinated with that idea and wanted to come up with something that, like, what if that thing could move around and have more of a physical presence? So Siren Head continuously broadcasts strange sounds and sirens and numbers and sometimes like gibberish. But Siren Head really got popular on social media in 2020, which I think it could be explained by a couple of reasons. One being COVID, we were inside, right? And like looking through social media more. And that's when we saw a little bit of a spike in like TikTok. So there's a lot of creative folks on TikTok and other social media platforms who kind of ran with this idea of Siren Head and, have these fake sort of like faux documentary style videos of like, oh my gosh, what's that? And then in like the distance of like a really populated city, there'd be Siren Head like doing an emergency broadcast sound. And I think that as folks who were going through a real global emergency at the time, there was something about that felt a little more familiar maybe than it would have in a different period. And it's also a little bit of nostalgic with that. It's not like this is, you know, a modern speaker like an iPhone or something that's, you know, on the top of this creepy looking monster. It's a little more retro. And I think that as our world sometimes seems scarier, that we tend to turn back a little bit to some of the older trends. I mean, we could see an example of that would be like the success of Fallout and the new Fallout series, right?
Yes.
Of all history, but more grounded in the past.
Yeah, that was a good show.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And the game's fun. Mothman is notoriously in the game. That's how I first learned about it.
Oh.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Mothman's one that does warnings too. Doesn't have a horn, but does.
Yes. Yeah.
Warning of
Symbol
danger.
of symbol of danger for sure. I saw I know we were both at Dragon Con recently, and every time I saw a Mothman cosplay, I would like scream like Mothman. And I think people thought I was a little overly enthusiastic, but I'm a fan of Mothman.
So now this one's a little challenging. If you could create a new type of monster based on current trends and fears, you know, what might it look like? What would it represent about today's world?
I think there's like two ways my brain first goes to approach that. I think one would not necessarily be something new, but the return of some of these older monsters that were said to be protectors of the environment. So something like the Mapinguari or the Slavic Leshy, or these, you know, monsters that kind of can be nice, cannot be, even fey folk to a degree, right? But it's like if you respect the land around you that you're occupying, like acknowledging that there's like a spirit in all things. I think seeing that'd be some really cool stories that could come up, right? Of these more ancient monsters that have been, you know, not happy with what's going on with the world and have decided to kind of come back in a little more of an obvious way. So I think that's one monster that could be really cool to see. I also think that I'm personally very reticent about AI, and I do use AI in the classroom to a degree, but I think having some kind of monster akin to like maybe a ghost or a spirit or a demon, so not necessarily a bodily physical presence, but being able to infect people through technology could be really terrifying. I don't know if you all are familiar with the series Rose Red. It's a little bit more of an obscure like British horror show, but it wasn't, spoiler, it was like human monsters behind it, but it was they would use AI technology through like an app and convince people that their like deceased loved ones and even people in their real life were doing terrible things to them and about them, and, you know, sharing sort of blackmail type social media videos. And I think, I mean, hackers exist, so it could be interesting to see like a supernatural hacker type situation come up with. I don't know what motivations would be behind that monster. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we're going to see more technology-based like monsters. And then on the other hand, I think we're going to see more traditional folkloric-based monsters that are grounded in these older traditions. I mean, again, I think we're seeing that a little bit with the popularity of the Fae folk or the good people. I know the Watchers movie just came out, which I saw, that kind of plays with that idea.
Yes,
so
we just watched that as well.
Yeah, what do you think?
It was good. Yeah, and
just,
I'm not usually one who likes scary movies, to be honest. I get too scared, so I'm just a wuss. But I did enjoy this one. I don't know why, but I hi.
Again, but I think like what it comes is even the title of the movie, right? So even if we separate it from like the Fae tradition, this idea of the Watchers, of being watched constantly. I just did a Halloween special about slashers that will be coming out this October that I'm super excited about. And I noticed a trend in neo slasher movies that there's less of this following through like the first person perspective of the killer and more of these like drone-like or very long camera shots where we're seeing the monster watch and stalk the victim in like a little bit of a different way than we have before. And I think, again, that speaks to the constant, surveillance that surrounds us in our everyday life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I found that I can watch a scary movie if Mark's, sometimes he'll watch it and he'll put the earbuds in, like if I'm trying to sleep, but then I'll kind of peek and try to watch it. And if I don't have the sound on, I can watch it and not get too freaked out. But as soon as the sound is on, I'm like, just if you can turn off the sound and just put the closed captioning up, then I can watch it much better. Yeah. Something about hearing everything gets me.
Yeah. I think horror movies, just kind of along that lines, are a genre that's really specifically like multisensory. The soundtrack and the dialogue and sound effects are all a major part of that spooky element. And if you asked me, I would say that has a lot to do with sort of our innate, biology to a degree of, kind of, it makes us feel on edge, again, in a different way.
Yeah. Talking about technology and supernatural, we talked a little bit before the show started about Evil, because we both watched that show. And I thought that was a cool thing where they use, they have a lot of references to technology and it being used for evil things. So
no, I'm a huge fan of the show. Like you said, I think they've been really creative in taking, that's a good example, right, of like this more ancient idea of demons, but then how would evil manifest in today's world? So yeah, the writers and the, showrunners behind that series are, I think, really, really creative. And I've been immensely enjoying watching it, and fingers crossed that we'll get another season.
Yes.
Yeah.
Save evil. Hashtag
yeah, because
save evil.
spoiler alert to people. But I loved how they had where the demons at the end were like, we don't have to do it the old way. We've got technology now.
Yeah.
It's
like the Zoom meeting.
They're like, this is going to be so much easier to torment people and take over with all this technology.
Yeah. I'm sorry. What was that? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh yeah. No, and I think that's what the showrunners said, is from at least articles that I've read, is that evil is something that's not going to go away, right, in that world. So it's just going to adapt. And I think monsters are very similar. Not necessarily that monsters exist for real or that they're evil, but I think they're just always going to be part of our culture. It's just going to morph into new and different shapes and new stories. And I'm excited to see, hear, and listen to those.
Yeah.
Awesome. I have one other question I wanted to put in there as I was thinking about as you were talking, like with that more modern monster with Siren Head. I'm assuming most people don't believe it's real, right? I would think, but maybe not. I don't know.
I think, like all monsters, there's a population that definitely thinks that, if not that they are like 100% real, that it's possible that they could be real. I mean, this is the difference that some people make between monster and cryptid, right? And some people would consider Siren Head to be a cryptid. So some actual tangible being that does exist in our real world in like a different way than maybe a ghost or an undead being. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are people out there who firmly believe these things. And I think that there are people who have had experiences, and I'm not one to discredit anyone's experience. So I can't conclusively say that people don't believe Siren Head is real. I think some people probably do. But for me, my research is more interested in not even why those people think or believe these things to be real, but how they tell their own stories and encounters with these creatures.
Yeah. Awesome. I think one of the scariest for me that's more recent that's come across on the internet is, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a humanoid, but it's on all fours. And it's supposed to be a cryptid, and it comes out at night.
I think I know what you're talking about.
And I can't really remember the name of it, but I've seen videos where people made it, and we're saying, oh, we found this and da-da-da. And it just something about a human looking thing, but being on all fours and animalistic is just creepy.
I think a lot of the original werewolf stories would agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of werewolf legends where the person isn't necessarily like shape-shifting or taking on features of a wolf, but it's just completely looks like a human with maybe shaggier hair and is acting like a wolf. So maybe that means like crawling on all fours, because there's something very uncanny about that. And I think that's where a lot of a deeper fear of humanoid monsters comes from, is that uncanny valley aspect where it's they're close enough to us that the way they're acting or looking is just weird enough that makes us deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. There's something about a human who isn't acting like a human
I
that
think
is
that's
just
like where
deeply
fear of
creepy.
clowns. Yeah, I mean, fear of clowns you could throw in there with that, or even like dolls, I think kind of fall as
Oh
subcategories
yeah.
there.
I
Yeah.
didn't think of that. I don't have a fear of clowns or
Or
dolls.
Elvis impersonators. That's something completely
Okay, fine.
different.
I do have a fear of Elvis impersonators, and he loves to throw that in my face.
That's what I see.
They're just not right in the head. I'm sorry.
No, now we just lost a bunch of viewers from Vegas.
I know. I actually had someone yell at me one time when I said I had a fear of Elvis impersonators, and she started yelling at me because her husband is one. And I
No.
said, I can't help it. I can't help what I find creepy.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Go
Go on. I
ahead.
was going to ask another question.
I was
You
going
want
to
me to go
mention that because we're talking about evil, it reminds me of the episode where someone was where they're watching a drone and they see someone possessed by a pig and they're walking
Yeah.
on all fours, and that was
Oh,
one of the
yeah.
creepiest
That was
parts of
just
the
in the last
episode.
season. Yeah, that was a good
That
one.
really was. See, it's not just me. Everyone else finds that creepy too.
I'll try it out in the open and see what happens and see if people think it's
Right.
creepy. No.
Yeah, just start crawling on all fours. At our age, the problem is getting back up.
Yeah.
All right.
we were,
What were you going to say, Julie?
well, we were talking a little bit about technology, and you've been actually running a show on YouTube for years.
Yeah.
And do you have any tips for someone listening who might want to start their own show on YouTube and make it
Yeah.
successful?
I think before I give my answer, I have to caveat it with like, it's not just me. I'm very fortunate to not have to be, I do research and write and host the episodes, but I don't have to deal with like post-production. So I'm very fortunate in that way. So if you have the option to have other people and like make a team, have a really good team behind you, I think in terms of, from my experience, like connecting with an audience and viewers is just being really passionate about the topic. Monstrum purposefully does not try to do anything that's like clickbaity or even necessarily trend driven. Sometimes what just is interesting me in the moment might also be big, like in larger popular culture. But we have like our core mission of being educational, and even before we're entertainment. So that's really important to me. I wouldn't recommend reading all the comments. You do have to develop a little bit of a thick skin if you want to have a successful YouTube show. But I think engaging with people, on the community tab and in the comments really resonates with a lot of people, because I know, at least as a creator, a lot of the time it feels like I'm screaming into a void. And I think that sometimes people who are watchers, make a comment and think that no one's going to see it. And I think when you can show people that like, yeah, I am watching and listening, like this is a dialogue between people who are like part of this global community, I think that can be something that really helps you get viewers and like good fan base. And for me, ultimately, it's not about the number of views, it's about making that like more personal connection. I think also not being afraid to ask for help, especially if you're trying to do something that is education or research based. Reach out to other experts, even if you don't feature them on the show. At least have them look at the script or like do an interview with them, and then of course credit them and thank them in the episode. I think that it doesn't have to be, I guess, a one person show, and maybe it shouldn't be.
That's some good advice.
Yeah,
and I love how you you kind of have this mission of bringing education outside of the classroom, because not everybody can afford to go to a college or a university, and B, those of us who are past that time in our lives still enjoy learning. And so it's nice not to have your brain go to mush as you get older, because you're not using it.
I'm clearly a lifelong learner. It's one of the reasons I went to grad school, one of the reasons I got into education, because I truly do see teaching as learning from my students and from the process every day. So I definitely understand that. And that's one of the reasons I do like things like cons, right? So that I can try to, bring well-researched, thought out education to people, because I firmly believe that most of us want to keep learning. And I don't think that we necessarily need to dumb down that learning to anyone.
Yep. Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on GenreTainment. It's great chatting with you. I've been a fan of your show for a few years now. So That's great having you on. So before you go, can you remind people where they can find you online?
Sure. You can find the Monstrum on the PBS Storied YouTube channel. We're also on the PBS Passport app. And if you want to learn more about me and my research, you can go to my website, www.drzarka.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Z. If you like monsters or folklore, be sure to check out her show Monstrum on YouTube. It really is a fun show. You can find Dr. Z at dremilyzarka.com and Monstrum at PBS Storied on YouTube. We have included links in the show description.
Yeah, that's a wrap for today's episode. And until next time.
Bad monkey.